we're not yelling.
Welcome back to Cross Politic on the Fight Laugh Feast Network. Thank you for joining us. We are very grateful to have with us on this segment Dr. Calvin Beisner. He's the founder and national spokesman of the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation, which is a network of over 60 Christian theologians, natural scientists, economists, and other scholars educating for biblical earth stewardship, economic development for the poor, and the proclamation and defense of the good news of salvation by God's grace received through faith in Jesus Christ's death and resurrection. Love how that's just right there, right at the beginning.
Yeah.
Dr. Beisner's written 12 books, edited over 30, contributed to over 35, and published thousands of articles, popular and scholarly, has lectured at universities, seminaries, conferences, churches all over the world, has testified as an expert witness on the ethics and economics of climate change and climate and energy policy before committees of the U.S. Senate and the House of Representatives.
Wow.
He's briefed the White House Council on environmental policy.
What's wrong with them?
And presented a paper to a scholarly colloquium on climate change at the Pontifical Institute for Justice and Peace at the Vatican in Rome. In 2014, the Heritage Foundation honored Dr. Beisner with the Outstanding Spokesman for Faith, Science, and Stewardship Award at the 9th International Conference on Climate Change. And best of all, most significant of all, he's married and has 7 children and 9 grandchildren.
Wow.
Thanks for joining us, Dr. Beisner.
Hey, it's great to be with you, and gee, I'm embarrassed by all that.
Well, this is your greatest feat yet, being on Cross Politics.
Now you can add, and has been on Cross Politic.
yeah, we'll have to insert that in there.
Okay, very good. We'll be looking for that. Hey, you wrote Prospects for Growth in 1990. I'm holding the book up for the viewers now. And you've been speaking about a biblical view of population and resources and environmental issues for many years now. How would you frame these issues, somewhat briefly if possible, for the working family? The working family that's just trying to pay their bills, put their kids through school, and they're trying to figure out whether to recycle or have more kids. I mean, how would you frame this?
Well, first I'd point out that recycling and having kids are not exclusive choices. You can do both. And we did.
Yeah.
I would start off with basically asking, what kind of a relationship with God do we have? Do we have a relationship with God in which we really believe that He means what He says to us in His Word, and that He provides for us as we walk in faith and obedience to His Word? Or do we not have that kind of relationship? And the reason I say that is that I think one of the key passages for couples in the Scriptures is Psalm 127, which says that children are a gift from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is His reward. Like arrows in the hand of a mighty man, so are children in the days of one's youth. Happy is the man whose quiver is full of them. Now, I have, by the way, seen somewhere somebody said that the average Hebrew quiver would hold about 60 arrows. I'm not sure that that's historically accurate, but I think maybe a dozen or so would be enough. But as we look at that passage, unfortunately, in the day of fears of population growth, in the day when so many people have come to think of added people in this world as essentially mouths that consume and nothing more than that, as burdens on the earth, as consumers of resources, we're tempted to revise what that says and say, instead of children are a gift from the Lord, children are punishment from the Lord. Not the fruit of the womb is His reward, but the fruit of the womb is His burden. And I guess ball and chain in the hand of a mighty man, happy is the man who has none. We just recently had Prince Harry tell the conference of climate elites from around the world in Sicily, Italy, that he and Meghan, his wife, are going to stop at a maximum of 2 because to have more than that is to put too much burden on the earth, to contribute too much to global warming. And I just think that's very sad.
Yeah.
And so, one final part of an answer to what you just asked is that during the first 8 years of our marriage, for the first 2 years, I had a regular job with a decent salary, but the next 6 years, I earned my living entirely freelance, editing, writing, occasionally speaking here and there. And in that time, my income never topped 70% of what the federal government defined as poverty at that time for a family of our size. We went from 1 child to 5 children during that time. And every single time we added a child, my income rose. And usually I couldn't figure out why. I couldn't, I hadn't done anything to make it do that.
Yeah.
And our attitude was simply, we will welcome whatever children the Lord gives us, and we will trust that the Lord will provide. And He always did. We never missed a meal. We never went naked. We also never either applied for or would have accepted any kind of government handout during those years. But God took care of us. And I believe that if we will live with a cheerful, expectant attitude of, yes, Lord, children really are your gift. They are your reward to us.
Amen.
And I will be happy to have my quiver full of them. Then I think that the Lord will indeed bless that.
So that's good.
Hey,
yeah,
man.
so that's good.
It's allergies in here.
Did you watch the Democratic debate on Tuesday and Wednesday?
I have typically had better uses.
All right. So, then let me give you a quote from there.
He's going to catch you up a little bit.
Governor Inslee attacks Joe Biden.
His energy plan.
Everyone has an eschatology,
right?
And Governor Inslee's eschatology thinks that we're kind of doomsday period right now. And he said to Biden, we have 10 years to get off coal and 15 years to get off fossil fuels to save the planet. Is that eschatology true?
Well, if that is true, then the planet is most certainly doomed because we will not get off of fossil fuels in 15 years. It is simply not possible. Anybody who knows the least bit about the history of energy technologies in this world knows that it takes a very long time to change around the whole infrastructure of how we provide energy.
Yeah.
Now, one of the first things to note is you're not going to fly any aircraft if we're not using fossil fuels.
Yeah.
Batteries to provide that much power are simply so heavy that the plane could never lift them.
That's one thing.
Not going to happen. We're all going to have to stop flying. There will be no more FedEx, except FedEx Ground, obviously. But besides that, if we were to electrify all the vehicles in the world, we would need many times more electricity than we have right now, and that cannot be provided by non-fossil fuel sources other than perhaps nuclear, which of course the greenies don't like anyway. And I mean, the whole thing is just simply, dreaming. It's dreaming. There is nothing realistic about it whatsoever.
So are they even right that it's a problem in the first place?
Well, what is a problem?
That fossil fuels and coal is a problem, environmental problem.
Well, there are some problems connected with fossil fuels. See, I'm trying to avoid the kind of blanket language that says it's a problem. Well, okay, there are some problems related to burning coal, for example. There is sulfur dioxide that comes out from that. There is mercury that comes out from that. There is soot that comes out from that. Now, we have the technology to put scrubbers on the smokestacks that turn them into no longer even being smokestacks because there's no smoke coming out of them.
Wow.
There is no mercury coming out. There is no sulfur dioxide coming out. There is no soot coming out. When you see photographs of billowing clouds over coal-fired power plants, what those clouds are is nothing but water vapor from the cooling systems of these plants. It's just simply water vapor. Well, water vapor is pretty good stuff.
Yeah.
That comes down in the form of rain, and it helps plants grow. Right? It doesn't seem to be toxic to anybody.
Right.
So there are real problems that can be connected with any of the fossil fuels. All of those real problems, we have the technology to abate to the point where they are not a significant risk. That technology is, it's more expensive to use that technology than not to use it. And that's why in very poor countries, your initial use of fossil fuels tends to be pretty filthy.
Yeah.
But the benefits of the power that comes from using those fossil fuels so far outweigh the risks from the pollution from them that during the same time that you see the pollution rising, you also see human health and longevity rising.
Right.
That is, people live longer.
Right.
And what that tells you is that the overall effect is a benefit to human life. But then, as they reach various different levels of economic production, these people choose to clean up their skies, to clean up their waters. It's a concept called the environmental Kuznets curve, or the environmental transition. And it basically means this: in early industrialization, pollution rises, but the benefits of the industrialization outweigh the pollution, outweigh the risks of the pollution, and that's why life expectancy increases during that time. And then at various levels of economic growth, people begin to abate the pollution. You get a peak in each different pollutant, and then it falls, and before long, it's actually down below what it was before the industrialization.
So it's got a natural fix in the system.
Yeah. Now, well, I wouldn't say it's natural. It takes human action. It takes human choice, and that happens better in some circumstances than in others. In socialist countries, where you have unresponsive governments and no private property or little private property, well, you don't have an awful lot of incentive to abate pollution. Good luck to you complaining to the government in the former Soviet Union about bad pollution. Good luck to you complaining to the government today in China about all the air pollution in Beijing. But the problem that Biden and all of these other Democratic presidential hopefuls have with fossil fuels really doesn't have to do with those real risks. Instead, it has to do with the notion that our burning fossil fuels is putting so much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and carbon dioxide absorbs so much heat bouncing from the surface of the Earth back out towards space and sends so much of that heat back down to the surface of the Earth that we're going to have catastrophically rapid and high magnitude global warming, and we're all going to fry. That's what they're worried about. Okay, I mean, 20-some years ago, 25 years ago, thereabouts, Time magazine had a cover of the Earth as a fried egg in a frying pan, warning of the great risks of global warming. Well, the typical way that so many of the alarmists will talk on this is to say, look, if you deny this, you're a science denier, because it's basic physics.
That's right.
That tells us that CO2 is an infrared absorbing gas, and that therefore it will absorb and retransmit heat bouncing from the surface of the Earth out towards space, and the Earth will be warmer than it otherwise would be. And if you're so stupid as not to understand that, you're a science denier, you're a climate denier, you're just as bad as a Holocaust denier. Right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, let me tell you something else that basic physics tells us. If you drop a rock and a feather at the same moment from the same height, they will hit the ground at the same moment. Unless they're in air.
Right.
In which case the rock plummets and the feather kind of wafts back and forth, and eventually it'll get to the ground.
Yes.
Unless it's windy, in which case the feather might blow up into a tree and get stuck and never come down.
Yes.
Till the tree comes down.
Right.
The lesson of that is that reality is a whole lot more complicated than basic physics.
That's good.
And so I'm perfectly happy to acknowledge that CO2 added to the atmosphere will make it a little warmer than it otherwise would be, all other things being equal. But all other things are not equal.
Yeah.
And there is a climate system that is probably the most complicated natural system we've ever studied, with the exception of DNA and the human brain.
Yeah. Wow.
And there are thousands of feedback factors in that climate system. We only understand a handful of them. There are many of them that we don't even know whether they're positive or negative feedback mechanisms. That is, we don't know whether they would increase a little initial warming or decrease a little additional warming.
Right.
We don't know the strength of many of them. And so it takes careful empirical observation to answer the question, how much warming comes from adding CO2 to the atmosphere.
Right.
And the empirical answer to that is turning out to be very little. Possibly even so little that we can't detect it, although I'm not going to argue about that.
So,
but it's pretty clear. And the reason it's clear is that the computer models that are the ground of all the predictions of dangerous warming all simulate twice or more the warming actually observed over the last 40 years since we got the best way of observing it, which is satellite global temperature measurements. And they assume that all of that warming comes only from CO2.
Right.
But we know from climate history that some of it could very easily come from natural causes other than CO2, and possibly even most of it. So we know that the models are wrong. If they're wrong, they provide no rational basis for any predictions about future temperature, and therefore no rational basis for any policy to deal with it.
They have no answers.
I saw pictures recently where they were taking down signs that were in Glacier National Park in Montana, where they had posted signs saying that these glaciers would be gone by 2020, and they're they're still hanging out. They're
still glaciers.
Well, I suppose if they took a bunch of flamethrowers up there and got working real hard with them,
they might be able to hit 220. So, Dr. Beisner, connect the dots here on this. The left are trumpeting batteries and wind turbines and all that, but basic principle: every action there's a reaction. The environmental hazard or effects that it does to create a battery is actually pretty catastrophic. The stripping of mineral mines, the recycling of those batteries, same thing for wind turbines and so forth. But no one talks about that.
Yeah, well, actually, some people do. A few years ago, I think it was about 5 or 6 years ago, something like that, maybe even a little bit longer. A team of researchers from a university in Scandinavia, I'm not sure whether it was Sweden or Norway, decided to do a life cycle assessment on the environmental impact of a Hummer and a Prius.
Yeah.
And of course, they started out assuming this was going to show what a great benefit the Prius was to the environment.
Right.
Instead, they discovered that because of all the problems with the precious metals, with the rare earth metals that had to be mined and had all sorts of toxic properties, and all the difficulties in disposing of the spent batteries used in the Prius, it turns out you're environmentally more friendly driving a Hummer than a Prius.
That's crazy.
I want to see that paperwork. I want receipts. But here's a question I have. I was hearing you talking to, I can't remember where it was, but you talked about the fact, right now it's no doubt that liberals are catering to the fact that they care more for the poor than anybody else.
The immigrants.
Than immigrants. And you were saying in another talk that actually the legislation that they put forward trying to be eco-friendly hurts more of the poor in the world than it does help. Could you explain how that happens?
Oh, absolutely. There are a couple of reasons why that's so. I'll go over the first one very quickly. It is that in order to implement the various different policies that these folks want to use to fight global warming, you have to have greatly increased government control over pretty much every aspect of people's lives, because you have to have government control over all of the different energy sources and systems that we use. And energy goes into everything that we do.
Right.
I mean, literally, truly, everything that we do takes energy. So the more government is going to control energy, the more government is going to control you. Well, what we know from history is that those economic systems that give people the greatest freedom, the most private property rights, the rights to entrepreneurship, free trade, limited government, the rule of law, those economic systems consistently create more wealth and get it into the hands of more people. They do a better job of lifting and keeping whole societies out of poverty than do societies where
that's the
you
play.
don't have those things.
Right.
That's the socialism play.
So there's that problem.
Right.
Now the other side of the problem is this, that what these folks want to do is substitute much more expensive, diffuse, unreliable energy sources, wind and solar and geothermal and biofuels, things like that, for fossil fuels. Well, those sources of energy are more expensive, and since energy goes into everything we do, that means the price of everything we do goes up.
Right.
Yep.
Well, whom does that hurt the most?
The poor.
Wealthy or the poor?
Right.
Yeah.
It hurts the poor the most. And that's exactly what Europe has discovered. Great Britain, for instance, from about 2000, I'm not positive of the years here. It's been a while since I've mentioned this. Around 2006 to 2012 or so, the average number of premature excess winter deaths in Great Britain more than doubled because electricity prices more than doubled. Actually, they almost tripled over that period.
Wow.
And so lots of people, especially the elderly on fixed income, could not afford both to heat their homes adequately to protect them against severe cold and to have enough food to eat.
Wow.
They chose to eat, so they froze.
Oh.
That's wicked.
So, and similar things happened in Germany. So the poor suffer as energy prices rise. But there's another reason, too, why getting away from fossil fuels hurts the poor. And that is that the very CO2 that these folks blame for supposedly catastrophic global warming, and that actually has a much smaller warming effect, right?
Right.
That very CO2 also makes all the plants in the world grow better. For every doubling of CO2 concentration in the atmosphere, you get an average 35% increase in plant growth efficiency.
Wow.
Plants grow better in warmer and cooler temperatures and in wetter and drier soils. They make better use of soil nutrients. They resist diseases and pests better. Therefore, they increase their ranges into hotter and colder areas, into higher and lower altitudes, into wetter and drier areas. They also improve their fruit-to-fiber ratio, which means that crop yields go up. And what this means is more food for everything that eats plants and everything that eats something that eats plants.
Yes. Yes.
And who are the
Which is
ones who
us.
benefit from that more than anybody else?
Us.
The poor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
If we artificially limit our CO2 emissions, we are limiting its impact on agricultural yields. A study done back in 2012 that surveyed hundreds of papers on the agricultural impact of rising CO2 concentration in the atmosphere concluded that from 1960 to 2012, the CO2 that we had added to the atmosphere by burning fossil fuels had, all by itself, added $3.2 trillion worth of food to the world's harvest.
Wow.
And it projected that as CO2 continued to rise from 2012 to 2050, the way the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change predicts that it will continue to rise, it would add another $9.8 trillion worth of food to the world's harvest.
That's unbelievable.
If we cut back on CO2, we reduce that benefit, and the poor suffer more than anybody else.
So why is it that the liberal machine
Is winning this argument.
has has the microphone hot in front of them? Why is it that it's exactly the opposite? I mean, they're claiming things that are you're saying the facts are actually just the opposite. Why have Christians been so susceptible to this propaganda, and why are we losing?
Well, first, I heard Bear mention in there that the liberals are winning this argument. You can't win an argument if you don't argue, right?
Right.
And the fact is that we have been, for example, since 2014, we have repeatedly challenged Dr. Catherine Hayhoe, who is an evangelical climate scientist who teaches at Texas Tech.
I'm sorry.
And who has become the darling of the you should be sorry. She's become the darling of the liberal media because she is this man bites dog story of this evangelical woman who is a climate alarmist.
Oh,
right?
man.
Well, since 2004, we have repeatedly challenged her to debate this issue with one of the climate scientists associated with the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation.
Right.
She has never even responded to the challenge.
Yeah.
The alarmists in this stuff refuse to go onto a debate stage with the skeptics, the critics, I think because they know they will lose the debate.
Yeah.
Back it
And
up.
I read the pros and cons on this all the time. I've been doing it for 20-some years. I've read over 50 books and thousands of articles on the science of climate change. The arguments are just simply better for the skeptics' side. But then the question has to be, okay, so why is it then that the media, the political class, the glitterati out of Hollywood and so on, why are they all into this?
Yeah.
And there are a number of different reasons. One of them is pointed out by Ben Wattenberg in his book, The Good News Is, The Bad News Is Wrong. That came out about 30 years ago or thereabouts. Sometime when you guys, I guess, were all too young to pay attention.
We noticed.
But I wasn't. I'm getting to be long in the tooth, But Wattenberg was an outstanding journalist and scholar simultaneously, and he pointed out that an old saying of journalists is, bad news is good news is no news. Now, why is that? Well, it's because for some strange psychological reason, human beings seem to be far more interested in news about crises than they are news about good things.
Yep.
So if you put a wonderful, pleasant story about some neat thing that happens on the front page, people don't care.
Yeah.
They won't read it. But you put bad news on the front page, people read it.
Yep.
Well, you have to have eyes on your newspaper, or you have to have eyes and ears on your TV news broadcast if you're going to sell advertising.
Right.
And advertising is what pays your budget.
Yep.
So how do you get advertising? You get eyes. How do you get eyes? You tell bad news.
Right.
So that's a major part of the deal. I mean, good news is no news.
Right.
Another major part of the deal is this. Proverbs tells us in Proverbs chapter 8, wisdom personified speaks, saying, all they that hate me love death. And there are an awful lot of people in this world who hate wisdom, especially when we realize that wisdom there is personified as the Logos of God, Jesus.
Right.
And so there are a lot of people who just simply love death, and there are all these different fear stories, scare stories about death that people jump onto. And then, of course, there's the fact that if we can persuade the public that catastrophe is around the corner unless the government does something,
Yep.
then the public will tell the government to do something.
That's right.
Yeah,
And that's
right.
what people in government really want.
Yep.
That's exactly right.
The green parties around the world largely were founded by ex-communists and socialists
Yep.
who in the
Yep.
60s and 70s started
we
to
have
realize, you know what? We lost the contest as to which system creates more wealth and gets it into more hands. So in order to get people to embrace socialism, we're going to have to quit saying that we will take better care of the world's poor, and we're going to have to say instead that we will take better care of the world, of the environment. They're wrong about that, and
Yes.
the track record in socialist countries is horrendous, and I discussed that in a little booklet that I wrote called "Is Capitalism Bad for the Environment?", which people can get from the Cornwall Alliance. Just come to our website, cornwallalliance.org, go to our online shop and order "Is Capitalism Bad for the Environment?".
That's great.
Wow, that just like underlines the fact that the gospel is so needed even here.
Yep.
That our love of wisdom begins by knowing Jesus.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And now and knowing Jesus means that we are not afraid of death.
Yep.
We don't live by fear anymore. And we now have the gifts and the tools by the gift of his spirit and by his word to take responsibility for ourselves. And we don't need to look to the government to save us from these things because Jesus saves.
Amen.
We have to have you come back on,
Amen.
Dr. Beisner. This is great. I still have like 7 questions to ask you.
That was good.
But
That was so
Prospects for
good.
Growth by Dr.
My
Calvin.
answers were too long.
No, they were excellent,
No,
man.
yeah, they were really
Do
good.
it again.
Yeah.
Prospects for Growth by Dr. Calvin Beisner. Pick it up right now. Get you one. More cross politics.
Yeah, and
Next.
by the way, anybody who makes a gift of any size to the Cornwall Alliance and asks for Prospects for Growth, we'll send them a copy for free.
Hey.
Just go to cornwallalliance.org, click on the donate button, make a gift of any size and ask for it, we'll send it.
That's what
That's
you can do
great.
during the break.